Yo, 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 I'm Candy B. I be knitting, and today I be deep diving into The Exploration Station by Stephen West. All right, we're going to do one of my pattern deep dives, and I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about the pattern, what I did for my version of The Exploration Station, and my thoughts and opinions about the pattern and the yarn I used. So, this is The Exploration Station by Stephen West. It can be purchased as a standalone pattern for about, today is May 1st, May 2nd, and it's going for €7 on Ravelry, and as of recording, that's about $8 and some change US. We're in 2025. Yeah, we're in May 2025. As of today, about maybe $8.50 American. Or I knit it from West Knits Best Knits Volume 1. And I have a physical copy of this book. I'm not sure. I think he's kind of like phasing out. I don't see a lot of physical copies in print of his books. This cost $35, and it's now going on Ravelry. You can buy the ebook version for €30, which comes to about $35 USD as of recording. And you would think I would have the page in my notebook marked. It was published October 2014, I believe that year. It was a, what do you call that? A mystery knit along. And it was published as a standalone pattern in 2014. And then this book was published in 2016. As a digital pattern, it is in English, Czech, Danish, Dutch, French, German, Icelandic, and Italian. If you do purchase this book, I believe this book is only in print in English. So off the bat, a difference between the, if you're interested in the print pattern versus the digital pattern. And I'm assuming eventually he'll add more languages down the line. As I said, this is May 2025. As of today, there are 8,641 Ravelry projects of this shawl, so incredibly popular shawl. And it is a 4-color top-down crescent shawl. It calls for 4 colors, as I just said, and you need mostly colors A and D. Colors A and D, you need about 260, 270 yards. Color C is the one you need least of, and it's 185 yards. It also calls for a US 6, aka a 4mm circular needle, 2 stitch markers, and a tapestry needle for weaving in one's ends. The gauge is 20 stitches by 48 rows over 4 inches of garter stitch, and the final shawl at that gauge should measure to about 22 inches deep and 70 inches in wingspan. The skills needed for this shawl, besides your basic knits and purls, there is some yarn overs and slip knits. There are short rows. Stephen West has, I'm not sure, like, people credit him with his short row method. I don't know if he truly like invented that method. But that being said, he tells you how to do the short rows in the pattern. It's not like, oh, learn German short rows or Japanese short rows. It is his short rows as described in the pattern. There is some brioche. There is some slipping of stitches. There is also an I-cord. You cast on an I-cord. You maintain an I-cord edge the entire project, and you cast off with an I-cord. And then you also have to work with carrying multiple yarns as well as weaving in ends. As far as difficulty goes, those 8,600 folk who did a project page, they rated this difficulty rating as average. I am going to go out on a limb and say that this is a beginner-friendly pattern. If you got your basic knits and purls down and you are ready to jump into okay, I made a washcloth, I made a scarf, I fumbled through some YouTube tutorials or some book tutorial, and you want to make something, I believe that Stephen West shawls make great first projects. He has incredible, there's links to YouTube tutorials. He basically takes you through picking your yarn, all the techniques you're going to need for the pattern. There are like I said, there's 8,000 projects on Ravelry. There's groups on Ravelry that are just dedicated to knitting Stephen West projects. I don't think Exploration Station has a class, but a lot of his shawls do have workshops that go along with them, or you can take any of his workshops and it'll take you through very easily how to do some of these more advanced techniques. Like if this is okay, I've never done brioche before, this is a great first brioche project, great for whenever you take on a Stephen West project and it's oh, I've never done that technique before, by the end of that project you will have that technique down, and it's always done in a very approachable, learnable way. I remember when I was first starting to knit and I saw some of his projects, I was just oh, that's not for me, that's next step. And then I started and I was no, this is actually pretty rhythmic, pretty straightforward. If you're a beginner knitter, you don't have to be super concerned with gauge. If you do make a mistake or you're not enjoying it at any point, you can first of all, you can always unravel your knitting. That is one of the best things and the worst things about knitting. But there is also something to be said about, with a shawl, just casting off wherever you're at. So you can do just the wedges and you can have a little tiny shawlette. You can do this brioche section and have just a little bit bigger of a thing. And yeah, at any point you can stop what you're doing and have something that is usable as some sort of you could make a headband basically. It's a very low stakes. I think it looks great in any colors. People think, oh, I have to buy a special kit. I mean, you can always get color inspiration from the kits, but I've used Karen Skinny Cakes. I've used all types of yarn for all types of different projects. So it doesn't have to be I'm going to a festival and buying, 4 skeins of hand-dyed yarn. I think this would look good, and especially this slip stitch section, in a white yarn and just showing off the texture. So it doesn't even have to be you could use one color, you could use 2 colors, just make sure that your yardage is there. So, and I said this last time, you could always just use one huge ball of a color changing yarn and just let the yarn do the work for you. So, I say go for it. For me, as what I would describe myself as a more advanced knitter, to me, the pattern was a little tedious. And I'll get into it when I talk more about how I felt about the pattern. I feel like this might be a little boring for a more advanced knitter. That's just my opinion. Or at least it wasn't what I needed in that moment that I was working on it. But right now I'm working on a Silver Bells sweater by Tin Can Knits, and I've never done bobbles before. I'm working on bobbles and I'm not enjoying the process of working the bobbles, but the fact that I know, by the end of making this sweater, I will know how to make bobbles and I will have this process memorized. That's enough for me to keep going with it, because that's what it kind of keeps driving me. And so for me, from my perspective, if I was a beginner, I'd be oh, I can do this. And once I tackle these techniques, I will have new tools in my repertoire. But because I kind of know some of these things and I've seen them before, it wasn't as exciting and kind of felt tedious. That's just how I feel. So let's get into my version and then I'll take you through each of the sections. So like I said, this is a 4-color. You need colors A through D. My color A is Zen Yarn Garden Superfine Fingering, 90% superfine wash merino, 10% nylon, 400 yards per 100 grams. And this is a one-of-a-kind colorway that I got from my local yarn shop. And Zen Yarn Gardens is not in existence anymore. Then my color B is this kind of yellow and golden color. And this is Passion Knits yarn. And this is on her Spellbound base, which is 75% superwash merino, 25% nylon, and the colorway name is yellow. She is actually currently on hiatus from dyeing. She went on a break at the end of 2024, and then in 2025 she said, oh, I'll be back in 2025, and then she kind of released something saying that she's still on a break. And so, sending out positive vibes, hope everything's well with her, but be on the lookout for her when she does come back to dyeing. Then my color C is Urban Girl Yarns, and this is the Virginia base, which is 480 yards per 125 grams of fingering, 90% superwash merino, 10% nylon. This is actually a 2-ply, and it's kind of like a turquoisey teal, and my label says Nimo, Nimo, but when I looked on Ravelry to tie my yarn to the project, I could not find that colorway, and I found a colorway called Nile, and so I think maybe Nile replaced the name of this as Nemo. And then D is Haynes House Yarn, and this is their Barefoot Sock. It's a 75% merino, 25% nylon, 463 yards per 100 grams. And this colorway is Every Good Bayesian, and it is some pale pinks, some pops of brighter pinks, a little bit of white, and then just tads of like the lightest little speckles of like orange, and it's supposed to kind of evoke a hibiscus tea situation. So those are my 4 colors. And this shawl is like a crescent shaped shawl. You do an I-cord cast on up here in your color A. And then the first section is called Short Row Showdown. And so you have these sweeping wedges of each of your colors. So A is my purple color here. And then it goes B, C, D, then B, C, D. And you get these wedges, and they're created with the short rows, and then you have stripes of color A with these eyelets. This was my favorite section of the shawl. I would love to do it. It kind of puts me in the mood of the doodler shawl, to be honest with you. If you wanted to, I was like, oh, I could make a whole shawl of just this, but it's kind of the doodler, not the doodler, and then there's another shawl that's like this where it's short rows and eyelets. And I always say the doodler, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. But anyway, so you just do B, C, D, B, C, D. This was my favorite section to do. And then you go into the next section, and it's B and C, and it's called Bountiful Brioche. And you do 2-color brioche with your B and C. B is in the foreground, that's my yellow color. And C is in the foreground, that's the teal color. And then, of course, with brioche on the wrong side, those colors are reversed in their appearance. Then you do another stripe with some eyelets of your color A, and you go into Sassy Slips, which is C and D together. You're sensing it. You can probably pick up on the pattern of how you're supposed to match up the color. It's like every color except for color A gets a chance to play with another color. So then we get into Sassy Slips with colors C and D. I don't think there's really, the wrong side is pretty wrong. It's mostly the teal color. So I guess if anything, I guess your color D would be the more prominent color on this one. Then another stripe of your A with some eyelets, and then you go into Nothing But Knit, where you create these garter ridges by striping rows of B and D. And that's where you get this kind of yellowy pink together. This is probably my least favorite section. I thought it was going to be my favorite section because I thought it was going to be pretty interesting to have these two colors together. But then I was kind of doubting it. Now that I'm done with it, I'm just fine with the colors that I use. But I was like, not my favorite. I think this shawl, the ones that I saw that felt the most successful to me were where B, C, and D were kind of in the same family, and then A was high contrast. So like he has one where B, C, and D are like blacks and grays and whites, and then color D is a yellow. Color A is a yellow, so you have stripes of yellow, and then you have like black and gray kind of just doing stuff together. And I think that those were the most successful to me. And that's a lot coming from someone who loves a lot of color. And then you end the shawl with color A, and this is called Chevron Shenanigans. And in the pattern, and we'll get into my alterations, you're supposed to bind off your I cord with color A. And so you end the whole shawl with color A. So yeah, probably my least favorite section was the slip stitch section. That just felt incredibly tedious to me. But it's done. It's fabulous. So mine, I told y'all my colors already. As far as like estimations for the pattern, I felt like the estimations were pretty decent. I used the size 6 needles. My gauge, I got the 24 stitches per 4 inch this way after blocking. I got 50 rows though, which are more rows than the gauge calls for. So as I've said before, I'm a bit of a tighter knitter. So my final shawl is actually, it's still, for some reason, I still got 22 inches deep, but my final shawl is only 59 stitches across, so just a little bit shorter than my wingspan. I could have a couple of things. I could have probably blocked it more aggressively. I don't like to block garter stitch super aggressively because I believe the integrity and the best thing about garter stitch, the defining characteristic of garter stitch is that you do get a little bit of like bunching and texture, and when you stretch it out, it flattens and smooths all that out. So I don't like to be too aggressive with that. And another thing is I measured my gauge on the garter stitch because that's what the pattern says, measure your gauge in garter stitch. So it doesn't really account for the brioche or any other place in the pattern where your gauge might change. And so that's probably the reason why mine is a bit smaller. My gauge was a little bit tighter, and there are other areas and other things to think about. Like when you do slip stitches, your stuff is going to tighten up, that kind of stuff. This is superwash yarn, so this will grow over time, and it grew a lot with blocking. Like it really, like I pulled it out of the water, and I try to be very, unless I am intentional, like when I did my lace shawl, I was stretching that bad boy out. But when I'm working with superwash yarn that I want the stitches to kind of have some definition, I kind of keep it real close to me, but I could have really stretched this out even more if I wanted to, and it probably will stretch with wear. So what did I do differently? I used just about 33 grams of the yellow, 44 grams of the Every Good Beige. And so my B and D were pretty accurate. When I got down to the end of the shawl with my color A, at that point, I just kept going because this is a one-of-a-kind colorway that's from a company that doesn't dye anymore, so it's not really that important to me to have leftovers. And I was looking to have a pretty massive shawl, which is even funnier that I made the shawl even bigger than it was supposed to be, and it's still smaller than it's supposed to be. And so at the end of the pattern, I had about 44 grams of my color A left over. And so I weighed my yarn, figured out how much it came out to, like about 4.5 grams per row. And so I figured I could do 8 more rows or 8 more repeats. That's the important thing, repeats versus rows when you're doing stuff like this. I could do 8 more repeats with that much yarn. And so this is about 4.3 grams. And I was just like, I'm not cutting it that close. This is a fine little nugget to have left over. And that's how I finished out this section. And then I was like, okay, so I used all that yarn. And so I was just like, so what am I gonna do to bind off? It seemed like a no-brainer to use this yarn to bind off. One, because I didn't realize this until I was putting the project into Ravelry. And y'all probably noticed as I was reading the yarn label, I didn't realize that this came in 125 gram balls. And so I was just like, oh, I have a lot of this yarn left over. So it was like way more than enough. Go ahead and knock that out, use this. And the other thing is, I don't like when I have an I-cord bind off and I use like a variegated yarn like this, I get like these chunks of color repeats because the color pools, because, you know, I-cord is just doing very short rows of knitting, or short rounds of knitting to be exact. And so it just creates like stripes. And so this was the most solid yarn I had left. And so I went ahead and did the bind off in this. This yarn is probably like my silver lining makes it seem like I hated the whole shawl. I didn't hate the whole shawl, but this was a highlight of working, of doing this shawl, because I bought this yarn in classic Candy Bee fashion, didn't pay attention to really what I was buying. And so I was like, oh wow, this comes in 125 gram balls and it's a 2-ply. And I don't see a lot of hand dyed 2-ply, or actually I don't see a lot of 2-ply yarn period in the commercial space. And so I was like, oh, I get it. And so it was just like a very different experience knitting with it. I liked the hand feel of it. And then the fact that I have because I have a whole nother ball of this. If y'all remember, I have a colorway called Michelle Obama that I almost used in this shawl. And so I'm like, oh, I have 125 grams of Michelle Obama. I could do some real damage with that. There's some like really great one skein shawl patterns out there. And I'm like, that might be perfect for that. And I'm so glad I noticed that I got some mega yardage out of this. And like I said, the 2-ply, I don't know, I just really enjoyed it. It's just nice to do something like, not that I hate, obviously I buy up the standard superwash sock yarn workhorse, you know, this stuff is great. I love this stuff. I'm going to make some socks out of this stuff. But it was just like, it's a different base. I don't, you know, a lot of the dyers do use a lot of the same bases. No shade, but it's just the truth. And so it was just cool to use a different base and realize that I had a little hidden gem in my repertoire, if you will. So I'm really glad to actually have this left over, because I bought this at Maryland Sheep and Wool a few years ago. Shout out to everyone going to Maryland Sheep and Wool. And I bought it with the intention of making socks. So I'm glad that I have a little shawl, and then I have another skein of this in a contrast color that I wanted to do color work socks in. So that's what this is going next. What was I saying? I got way off track. So yeah, I had so much of that Nemo or that Urban Girl yarn left over that I did my cast off. And so it just has this extra pop of color. And that's like one of my favorite little like stash busting, you know, hacks, tips, whatever you want to call it. I love having like maybe 10, 15 grams of yarn to just do a contrasting I-cord. It just adds visual interest, and it's a great way to use yarn that otherwise, like, okay, I guess I can use this for contrasting heels, toes, and cuffs, or I can do this, or I can do that. But, you know, I love blowing through yarn in a project and adding more and more yarn in a project. So other than those, that was the big thing that I did differently, was I just kind of kept going with the chevrons. At a certain point, if you were to continue with these chevrons, you would want to add more eyelets to expand the motif. But where I stopped, it was like just enough, and no one's really going to notice that these aren't like totally evenly spaced, because there's like some doubled center decreases here. So technically I could have started here and done some eyelets and kept going if I had more yarn. I did, when I read the pattern, there were some places where Stephen has you cut yarn that I'm just like, oh, you know, there's ways to carry the yarn through the I-cord. I am a person that tries to avoid having extra ends to weave in at all possible points. And so like after each section, which makes sense, like especially if you were using like scraps or were doing something different with your patterning, like if you were like, oh, I want color A to be here, but color B to be a different color here. But like here, where he has color D is up here and then color D is down here, he has you cut the yarn, and all I did is I just laid it in the I-cord and carried it through the I-cord and just picked that yarn back up and kept knitting, and it's pretty seamless. But if you don't mind weaving in ends, just cut it where he tells you to cut it. But I was just like, do I really need to cut it? I always like wait and like knit the next row and see if I really need to cut the yarn. So y'all can probably guess, not a huge fan of this pattern. The final product, let me separate those things. I guess there's levels to it. The pattern, well written. There is like an errata, but my book was correct. Like the errata corrects the, one of the double decreases is described incorrectly. And so if you bought it digitally like years and years ago, you'll need the errata, but the book being published 2 years after the original project is like bang on accurate. Like I said, I just had some disagreements about if I would cut the yarn or not a big deal. So whenever you're buying Stephen West patterns, it's like a no-brainer. It's going to be well written. It's going to be easy to follow. He's going to take, you know, even if you can't figure out the written instructions, you can go to the YouTube. Usually what I do with these shawls is after reading a few rows and setting some things up, like that's like a major key is when you do these short rows, I always put stitch markers at each of my repeats and I can see where my last turn was. Someone on Instagram gave me that advice and I live by that advice now. But once I read like a couple of rows of what I need to do, usually I immediately recognize, oh, this is like there's the written instructions and then there's the, oh, this is what he wants me to do. So if like you get to a point where your stitch count isn't working, then just do what feels right, you know, kind of thing. Or he'll tell you like, hey, you know, just put in a decrease somewhere, put in an increase somewhere, or, you know, as long as, you know, after you do a couple of rows of brioche, you can see that's what brioche is supposed to look like. So kind of just figure it out. If, you know, you get here and you're one stitch off, just make sure your eyelets are in a straight row and then just add a stitch on either side. It's very great stuff. For me, it was just a little boring and a little tedious, considering the other patterns that I've done by him that have been more fun and more exciting. I don't in general like to knit the same thing twice. I wouldn't necessarily knit this again. If I'd knit it again, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily knit this again. There are so many other, my goal is to knit all of his shawls eventually. and I've got a lot more shawls to go, so I can't see myself revisiting this anytime soon. Yeah. I really want to be positive. I guess I can't help it. Shouldn't make a YouTube channel if you always want to be positive about everything. The thing I will say about the final project, I love the final result. I was doubting my color choices. I was doubting which colors. I never doubted my color A. My color A always made sense to me. I had moments where I wanted to switch around B, C, and D, but now looking at it as a finished project as a whole, I'm really happy with it. The big thing about this, the big goal with this is I want to show y'all something else. This is my cozy corner shawl. This is another Stephen West pattern, and this is from Hybrid Knitting Volume 1. And this bad boy, there's like shawl blankets, schlankets. This is literally a blanket. It's a shawl pattern, but it wears like a blanket. And I made this out of shawl in a ball. And ever since I made this, I have been like chasing this same high again of having like a blanket shawl. And I made my vertices unite. And I don't know if y'all remember, I was a little disappointed in the final product with that because it just was not deep enough, and it wears more like a scarf than a shawl. And I've been wearing this a lot, like watching TV at night. And I wanted something this is Shawl in a Ball by Lion Brain, which is like acrylic cotton, tiny bit of wool. And I was just like, I really want like a luxury deluxe schlanket to like wear out and about. I actually wore my exploration station on a date last night. And so this, as far as being a big boy shawl and being made out of my hand-dyed yarn, it's absolutely perfect. 22 inches, wearing it like this actually covers my whole back. For the record, I am 5'6", about 160 pounds. So your mileage may vary, but for me, it's like, oh wow, this is where it's at. This is exactly what I wanted. But like I said, there are other shawl patterns that would give the same effect. And there are other shawl patterns that I'm excited to knit. And so this is not one that I would necessarily revisit. Glad I did it. Funnily enough, I do not care for brioche, but I think the brioche is literally the most effective out of here. And so I've actually been looking at some of his shawls that have brioche more as a main feature. I know it's going to be a slog, but I'm willing to do slogs for effect or for a final product that I feel like is like, wow, this is just okay. As far as if you wanted to purchase the collection of West Knits Best Knits, so far this is my third shawl out of this book, and there are 2 or 3. Like I said, eventually I want to knit every single Stephen West shawl. There are 2 or 3 shawls in here that are like, I have yarn for them. They're next up in line. I am actively interested in knitting them, and I've already done 3 shawls out of here, and the whole collection has 13 shawls. So it's worth it to me. And I like books. I like physical books. I love the pictures that are in them. I like making my own notes. So if you are a fan, even if like 1 or 2 shawls aren't your personal taste, or 1 or 2 shawls you'll knit, once and then move on, I think it's worth it. With all that being said, this is the one of the brioche shawls I'm thinking about. The whole thing is just a long brioche wrap. And then I've been watching Amber Marie on Ambi Marie Knits. If you don't watch her and you like me, you should watch her. I find her vibe to be very relatable. And she just did a brioche shawl that I believe was a Stephen West shawl that I'm like, it's like, because I was like, oh, this would be so cool if I just did bands of brioche and crescent and then just switched the colors and just did different colors. And she did like a hot pink and green one recently that I'm just like, that's what I want. Even if I don't like knitting brioche, I like the look of that. And then she actually took a brioche knitting class recently that has like all different types of brioche knitting and just some really cool effects. So like I said, I think the tedium is worth it here. The slip stitches, it took me a while to figure out the effect I was even going for, and I just don't think this final effect is worth the tedium. I did learn though that I don't like slip stitch color work, so I've been looking at a lot of those Andrea Mowry patterns, and I was just like, I don't think I was like, oh, because I've never done an Andrea Mowry pattern before, and I was just like, I've been looking at like some of the vests she's done with slip stitch patterns, and I'm just like, if I don't like this for this many rows, I'm not gonna like all over vest of slip stitches. So I'm glad I did it in here and realized that I don't want to do that, and so maybe I'll pick a different Andrea Mowry pattern for my first Andrea Mowry pattern. And then this is just stripes. It was nothing to write home about. So yeah, maybe my next one will be just all brioche, because I just think that juice is worth the squeeze. And I always love a good chevron. And I really enjoyed these wedges here, but not necessarily for this pattern. Dotted rays is the other one I'm thinking of. This is the dotted rays, which I've made before, and I think I've shown y'all on here before. It's all eyelets and short rows, and he actually has instructions on how to stripe it in there too, and so I could see myself doing something like that. This one is different for the fact that if you look at the purple, and that's the areas where you have to cut the yarn, you have a wedge going like this, and then you have the wedge of the purple going like that, and so you are kind of switching what your right side and what your wrong side is without giving away too much of the paid for pattern. But if you like the final product, and or you've never done some of these techniques before and you want to learn something new, go for it. But just for me, it was just like, now I know I don't like that, which is a lesson in and of itself. That's all I got to say. It's all love, right? Because y'all know I love Stephen West. That's why it just pains me. I was like, oh, I really wanted to like this. That's all I got for you. What are some of y'all's favorite designers? What are some of your favorite techniques? Let me know. I'm just glad that I got something off of my to-do list, because I was telling y'all how I love shawls, and I did not knit nearly enough shawls for myself. So I'm like in April, and I've knit 2 shawls for myself. One of them is a Stephen West shawl, so that's like another shawl off of my bucket list shawl list. And so I'm just like, I have time to knit at least one more. I mean, like, obviously I have like a million months to knit. Not a million months. I don't have unlimited time. But I could, if all I knit was shawls, I could knit a lot of shawls. But being generous to myself, I could knit a whole nother shawl this year and really knock my goal out of the park. But yeah, all of that stuff. Let me know if anything I said resonated with you. Have you knit this before and you're like, Candy B, you're tripping. That is the funnest time I've ever had knitting a shawl in my life. I loved the 2014 mystery shawl. What's wrong with you? Feel free to argue with me in the comments. Share, like, subscribe, email me candibknittin@gmail.com. Instagram is @Rulude. Ko-fi is Rulude. Candy Be Knittin on Blue Sky, Candy Be Knittin on Ravelry, and all that good stuff. Until the next time, peace.